Hi, I'm Teri Lott. I'm a storyteller, puppeteer, and author of books for children and families. And it's my favorite time of year. It's spooky season. So the story I'm about to share with you might not be appropriate for children, especially young children. This story comes from Transylvania, but it is not about a vampire because stories from Transylvania are about other things as well. This particular story is about a spirit, and it is called The Three Partners. Andrew was a successful, wealthy businessman. Francis was a farmer, and Matthew a grave digger. And they, even though it seems unlikely, were friends and formed a partnership. For you see, Andrew knew of an abandoned gold mine, and he could feel it in his bones that there was still gold in that mine. And so he financed, and Matthew and Francis agreed that they would do most of the labor. Off they went. And with their new tools in hand, they started chipping away at the rock walls. They worked for 2 days and found no gold. On the third day, they found a split. And they decided it would be very sensible for one of them to go to the right and one of them to the left, and just to call out if either of them found any gold. So that's what they did. Now Francis had been chipping away at the wall for several days with no success, and on the third day he heard, "Meow, meow, meow. Give me a man's head and I'll give you plenty of gold, meow." And Francis turned and looked, and there was a black, scruffy-looking tomcat sitting on a plank. But the plank was floating in midair, and the cat's eyes glowed red. Now, Francis was not someone who was easily spooked, but he decided that he must be seeing things, especially when he reached his hand out to touch the cat, and it disappeared. And so he decided that he had been working too hard, and he went home and went to bed. The next day he showed up and he went to his part of the gold mine and he started chipping away at the rock when he heard, "Meow, meow, meow. Give me a man's head and I'll give you plenty of gold." And sure enough, even though he really didn't want to look, he looked, and there it was, that same scruffy, scrawny black cat floating on that plank with the red glowing eyes. And Francis just decided, I'm going to ignore it. And he didn't tell his partners about the cat either. And that cat showed up for the next couple of days at noon and 6 p.m. like clockwork. Francis had no luck. He struck no gold. In the meantime, you remember Matthew, right? Working on the other part of the gold mine. Well, he had been working for several days and he had not hit the mother lode. No gold. And that's when he heard, "Meow, meow, meow. Give me a man's head and I'll give you plenty of gold, meow." Matthew looked, and there was a black, scrawny tomcat on a plank of wood that was floating in midair, and it was strolling back and forth. But upon closer observation, he noticed the cat had the face of Francis. Now, Matthew was not a highly educated man, and he didn't understand what all of this meant. And so he left the gold mine, and he went back into town and reported everything that had happened to Andrew. Andrew thought about it for a while, and he said, I believe you have met the spirit of the mine, and since it has the head of Francis, that only means one thing. Francis has joined together with that spirit, and we will never ever find any gold until Francis is dead." So the next morning, Matthew hid in the shadows of the opening of the mine, and when Francis walked in, he came up behind him and hit him on the head with a shovel. Oh, Francis's head started bleeding and he fell to the floor of the mine. Matthew reached and grabbed him under his arms and pulled him out of the mine, across the way to where there was a deep ravine. He left his body and he pushed it, and it rolled down the ravine and landed at the bottom. The deed done, Matthew went back in to work on chipping away at the walls of the mine. Now, since they were one man short, Andrew had shown up to work Francis's part of the mine, and he had only worked for 2 hours when he hit the mother lode. All kinds of gold was before him, all for just chipping away, and it fell to the ground. But he started thinking, if he went to the sheriff and reported that Matthew had killed Francis, he wouldn't have to share any of the gold at all. Now, granted, he might be found complicit in the planning, but he could pay the judge off. He'd have all this gold after all. And so quickly, Andrew left the mine, went into town and reported Matthew, and then headed back to the mine to get busy at work, chipping away, watching the gold fall to the floor of the gold mine. In the meantime, Matthew, you remember him, right, was working in the other part, and he had had no luck at all. And then he heard, "Meow, meow, meow, give me a man's head and I'll give you plenty of gold, meow." And even though he didn't want to look, it was like he had to. And when Matthew looked, that black scrawny cat now had the head of Andrew. What did this mean? Matthew didn't understand, and so he walked to the other part of the gold mine to ask Andrew to explain this latest occurrence. And that's when he saw it. The wall of gold that Andrew had uncovered. And then Matthew realized Andrew hadn't called out. He hadn't told him about finding the gold. What was going on? He became enraged. And without thinking, Matthew crept up behind Andrew, picked up the pickaxe that was still in his hand, and he brought the pickaxe down on Andrew's skull, splitting it right in half. Andrew fell. Matthew was mesmerized by all the gold when he heard a shuffling of footsteps behind him. He turned around and he saw the ghost of Francis, pale with dried blood on his head, shuffling along. And Matthew screamed, "Ah!" And he started to run, forgetting about Andrew's body. He tripped over Andrew, fell, and hit his head on a rock. Francis stood there, bewildered. The last thing he remembered was something coming down on his head and then waking up at the bottom of a ravine. He had clambered out of the ravine and crawled to the opening of the mine and finally had enough strength to barely push himself up. He had come to find out what was happening. And there lay his partners. Andrew obviously dead. He went over and checked on Matthew, but there was no pulse. And that's when he heard, "Meow, meow, meow." Take all the gold you can carry and leave this place, or you'll meet the same fate as your partners. Meow. Francis decided to listen. He stuffed his pockets with as much gold as he could, and he put some in his arm, and he ran out of the gold mine, and he was just rounding the bend in the road when the sheriff and his men showed up to arrest Matthew. Except when they arrived at the gold mine, the only thing there were some ancient tools. No one else. Meow, meow. And this is a cautionary tale. Black cats are wonderful. In fact, last Sunday was National Black Cat Day. But if you ever meet a black cat with glowing red eyes, perhaps you should go the other way. Meow. I hope you've enjoyed this story from Transylvania called The Three Partners. If you would like more information about my storytelling or the books that I have written for children and families, contact me at lotts.of.tales@gmail.com. And I hope that you have a happy Halloween. Happy Halloween! I'm Teri Lott, storyteller, puppeteer, and author. Bye-bye.